Welcome to In It to Win It. This is Steve Barton, and thank you for tuning in. We are here with the Silver Guru, also known as David Morgan. David, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve. It's a pleasure, and it's the first time, so let's go.
Yes, I maybe since it's your first time, maybe we could start out. If you could just give us a couple minutes on your background and how you got into precious metals.
Yeah, I hope I can do it in 2 minutes. I actually updated my bio recently, and I kind of trimmed it down. But I got fascinated by money at an early age, and I was 11 years old when the coinage went from silver coins to what I call Johnson slugs. So that kind of intrigued me, but I didn't like to think, oh, I'm the silver guru. I mean, none of that went through my mind. And as I got more experience and being kind of obsessed about the money question, like, how do they build skyscrapers? I mean, all I knew is I had to save up a certain amount of money to buy a house, or a certain amount of money to buy a car. Because then I learned at an early age there's such thing as a mortgage and you can borrow money. But how do you borrow the money for a skyscraper? I just didn't comprehend it as an 11-year-old. So as I got more sophisticated and learned more and more on my own, I discovered, how banks work. And once I discovered that, there's a system that's what I call legitimate or sound money based, and there's ones that are just lawfully based, that just basically money could be anything we say, and we have the power to enforce that. And this is the way the monetary system has morphed into after Nixon closed the gold window on August 15th, 1971. So I was fascinated with that. I was kind of obsessed, I keep using that word, with the newsletter industry, because in the old days it was snail mail, and this was the only kind of inside alt media that you got at those times. And I actually learned about it from the test pilots I was working with when I was a crew member on the B-1 bomber at Edwards Air Force Base. So they were reading, one of the pilots was reading the other pilot this newsletter we had, and I'm in the back seat, just all ears. I'm like 22 years old. And I'm like, wow. So I asked him, how do you get a hold of this publication and all that? And I kind of broke into learning about it. And then I decided that's kind of what I'd like to do, even though I was in the aircraft business for quite some time. I was just fascinated with gold and silver and honest money and all the things these people were writing about. So I had an opportunity to do that and started that about 25 years ago. And the biggest mistake I made was putting a lot of money into the junior mining sector. So I learned that lesson the hard way. And when I started the Morgan Report, I wasn't even going to start with any junior mining companies. But I discovered one, you really couldn't have a viable business, because that's what everyone's taught to think they're going to make a lot of money in. And really, you go broke if you put nothing but your money into penny stocks, because most of them go off the board. In other words, they go to zero and they no longer exist. So anyway, I started the Morgan Report with big money into big companies, primarily on the royalty companies, because they have such good profit margins. And we've done very well over time. Certainly I've made mistakes. Certainly I've not made every call perfect. I can, pat myself on the back a little bit that I've called every top so far. My bottom calls have not been as good. Everybody knows that. I admit it almost every interview. But you don't need to get the exact bottom or the exact top. In fact, that's an amateur's approach. You really want to get within 20% of the bottom and 20% of the top. And if you do that, you're in the professional ranks. So you can't wring out every penny. Love what you get. It's all you're going to get. If you sell a stock and it doubles and you double your money and you sell out, then good for you. And if it doubles again, forget about it. Don't beat yourself up. What we do on the juniors is just that. Once the stock doubles, and many of them do, sell half and ride the rest for free. And if the stock goes up tenfold, you say, oh, if I held it all, I would have made twice as much money. Yeah, it's true. But the odds are very much against you. Only 1 in 4,000 comes to mind. So I got off my bio into kind of my philosophy, but that's how I started the Morgan Report. And still have those fundamental principles today. And it's helped a lot of people that are serious in the sector. We mostly work on the equity side, but I do futures, options. I look at the bond market. I look at the dollar. I look at other currencies. I don't do a lot of trading in other sectors. I did put on some shorts on the housing sector through ETFs, because I think the housing market, commercial, I should say housing, I should say commercial real estate, is going to do what the 2008 real estate market did on the residential side. In fact, I think it's going to be worse. So I got a couple short plays, but they're very modest, leveraged through the ETF system, and that's where I'm at. So back to you, Steve.
Okay, I kind of had a similar entry into silver. Well, maybe not quite, but I remember my dad always collected the silver dimes and quarters, and he instilled in me at a very young age that these are worth more than the regular pot metal ones, you know. And so anytime I got change, you know, I was always selling candy at school, some kind of side hustle, and I would always pick out the silver dimes and quarters and set them aside, but never really understanding why they were more valuable than the other ones until I got older. And then I realized it was the metal content, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, it was real money.
Well, I have to do a side one real quick, but you know, I've heard anecdotally that a lot of people, you know, and there's probably still some silver quarters and dimes out there. It's just because there were so many at one time. But I've never got that opportunity. And actually, I did one time. It was here in my local area, and I just happened to. I use cash a lot, so it was a gasoline filling station, and I went in to pay cash, and my change was like, you know, it was like 1901 or something. So I got almost $1 back in change, and I got like 3 silver quarters. And I think what had happened is a person that just paid before me had paid in silver and didn't know it. Most people, you know, I've talked to people again anecdotally that, you know, their mother had silver quarters in their sock drawer and they were needing bus fare. I'm talking about years ago when it was that cheap. And they just saw a quarter as a quarter. They didn't realize it had a metal content that was more valuable. Mom did, because it was in her sock drawer for safekeeping. And they just took it and spent it. So that happens, not much anymore. But yeah, there's randomly it out there. But you know, you could go waste a lot of time, you know, getting rolls of quarters at your local bank and going through every one of them looking for quarters. But there are probably some out there still, but it's a very random thing.
Yeah, I haven't found any, at least in a couple of years, but I remember finding them all the time as a kid. You know, when I would roll my change, I'd look down the side of it and I'd be like, oh, there's one. That hasn't happened. Not recently, anyways. All right. We got some listener questions. And this one is from Christine. She says, we already have a large silver position, but looking to add, and have friends who want to buy for the first time. In your opinion, what would be the best time to add? Now, when we have a pullback of $22, or when the recession hits and silver dips? Which one do you think will be lower?
It's hard to know. First of all, the truth is I don't know. I advocate dollar cost averaging for stackers. You might want to look up the 10 rules of silver investing. I think if you type in any search engine, 10 rules of silver investing, David Morgan will pop up. I've done videos on it. I've been interviewed about it, and it's out there in on the web, several places, my own site as well. That'll give you an idea. But my guess would be it won't be the recession. It'll probably just be these periodic dips. I am on record. Again, my bottom calls aren't as good as my top, but my bottom call right now is it won't go below 22. See if I'm right or wrong. A quick example on, you know, how hard it is to call bottoms, at least for me. The silver price, and I have to look at the year, it's been years ago, but it hit 1817, I think was the exact number. And I said, that's it. That's the bottom. It was a spike low, which silver typically does, a spike high and a spike low. And I was right for 14 months. So over a year, that was the low. And then it pierced it and went below it. So was I right? Well, yeah, for a year, but was I wrong in the long term? Yeah, I was. So, you know, again, silver is a lot more difficult to analyze than gold because gold is establishment, really, even though you won't see it on the establishment. On the main financial channels, all the central banks own it, and they own it for a reason. It's the money of last resort. And if everything else fails, gold will come back.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen here real quick and just pull up the chart on silver. And this is the daily chart. And this is where we are right now. And so we can see that we're kind of in this upward channel trend line right here, Christine. And pretty much if you were to buy at each one of these points where it hits this trend line, you'd be doing pretty well over the last year, right? And look at where we are now, right around $20, right around that trend line. And, you know, if the recession were to hit tomorrow, and let's say the metals got washed out simply because they have a bid and we went down, you know, 25% or something, then we'd be at 17 or 18 bucks. But what if we run up to 28 and then the recession or some other event happens and it gets washed out and moves down the same percentage? Well, then we're at right where we are right now. So now doesn't look like a bad time to me. I don't know, but to each his own, but that's where your dollar cost averaging kind of takes care of all of that. If you just buy something every 2 weeks or the first of every month or whatever works for you, then you don't even have to look at the charts.
Yeah, nice chart. And I'll just add, certainly, again, I don't know for sure, but I think the second case that you outlined is most likely. It's going to bounce off that trend line, maybe hit the top at 28, as you suggest, and then come back. So it comes back to 25 or whatever. So you're better off. I mean, I've said for a long time, anything under 25 long term, you're going to be happy. What's long term? Well, if you're my age, you might not have a long term, maybe 10 years or whatever. But someone younger, I mean, if you've got a time horizon of 5 to 10 years, I think it's a legacy investment with what's happening in the technological world, where silver is needed more and more, especially for the photovoltaic industry and also the monetary sphere. I mean, the margin is money. In other words, the variable in the silver equation is not industrial demand. That's a constant or slightly growing year over year. What the variable is investment demand. Sometimes it's extremely strong. Sometimes there's very little demand, but that's what moves the price.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So you kind of answered user JE's question from Gary. Gary says, I purchased most of my gold and silver back in the early 90s. Well done, Gary. I'm pushing 80 years old now and was wondering about tax consequences if I decide to sell when gold and silver go up as I expect them to do. I know some states do not tax the sale of gold and silver, but Oregon, where I live, being the liberal state it is, probably would. Could I take my metals to another state and sell?
Well, that's a good question. I don't give tax advice, so I'll answer it theoretically, but yeah, you could go to another state.
Okay. And there are certain things where dealers are required to report, correct? If you
that is correct. There are exceptions to that. Idaho, for an example, the hedge fund friend of mine, and he also owns a storage facility, is not required to report anything. But you are, it depends on your status. If you're a U.S. citizen, obviously you are in the system and you're required to do certain things. But yeah, going to a different state. The main problem with the tax situation, the way I see it, again, not tax advice, is that silver is considered a collectible. So it's taxed at a very high rate. And the Silver Institute over the years has tried to, go to Congress many, many times and, take care of that situation. I mean, it should be taxed as capital gains. It shouldn't be taxed at all.
Right.
I mean, in some of the states, it's considered money and is non-taxed at the state level, but that doesn't apply to the federal. So, and I would ask, by the way, digress a bit, Steve, but I'm going to interview Stephen Gleason, who's kind of at the tip of the spear on this issue. He's done a massive amount of work that most people don't even know, because it's not well known how much work goes behind the scenes to change the system for the better for precious metals owners. And I'm going to interview him and go through kind of what states do what. Some are not taxed. Some are you can use it as a means of exchange at any level, as long as both parties agree. So there's actually a lot to it. And I've been wanting to get him on a podcast. I just haven't done it yet, but I plan to do it here probably within the next 2 weeks.
Okay. So Gary, tune into that one. Yeah, I know there's also Andy Scheckman taught me this, that basically if you sell 25 ounces of Krugerrands or Maple Leafs or Mexican onzas to him, he's got to report it. If you sell 24 to him, he doesn't. And the next day, if you sell 24 to him, he doesn't. So you can scale out using a method like that as well.
I'll just add one thing. I hate to interrupt, but the other thing is contract. We're still allowed to contract in this country. So, you're 80 years old. I don't know, your status as far as, your financial situation, but you could buy a car with it. You could buy a house. You could buy land. You could pay off debt. You could do anything. Even in a state where it's not legal to do so, you're still legal to contract. So I could contact with you, Steve, to say, I want to do a podcast with you or make a mini documentary, let's say, and I'll pay you, X amount of silver. As long as we both agree, we could settle that way. So I like the idea of spending it back into circulation rather than changing it for fiat. I would rather keep it amongst us, knowledgeable people about sound money rather than just giving it back to the man, so to speak. And not that you shouldn't sell it back to Andy or whatever. That's fine. It's your choice. But there are other options. And when you own it, you can set the price. I know that sounds kind of weird, but you can. If the price is 22, I forget the exact price you showed on your chart, 22 and change. Well, I know I'm going to be paying, what, 25.50, 26.50, even for a silver round because the premiums are so high at this point in time. So we might settle at 25. So I'm getting more in fiat for, this contract I made with you than I would selling it back to a dealer. And I think people need to think about that more and more because really silver is the ultimate money. It's just that people have been misled or misconstrued as far as what money even is. I mean, most people think that currency is money and it's not. So I'll turn it back to you. Let's get another question.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know I've read on your site that you'll do you get paid in silver, and I didn't know that was a legal thing. That
Yeah, well, for example, on my main service is $500 a year, and I'll take $400 in silver, so you get a 20% discount. If you're in the load program, which I am, it's a digital gold and silver platform. You could pay me again $400, and I'll give you $500 in value. So I value silver more than I do fiat, and therefore you get the discount if you want to take it.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay, question from number one fan from Spain, Carlos, says, "Hello, Mr. Morgan. What is your preference for investing in silver? Physical, explorers, junior producers, or producers? Thank you."
Yeah, always physical. I've been very consistent. At least I believe I have. I mean, anytime I'm asked that question, I say, I really don't want you to subscribe to the Morgan Report unless you have got physical metal first. I mean, that's the basis. I'm not a coin dealer. I do have an affiliate program with a couple of people. One's used to be called Silver Saver, changed the name to Own X, and it's a monthly program where you purchase, dollar cost average. And another one is the hedge fund manager that I alluded to earlier. And that's unfortunately, or the way it is you have to be kind of a high net worth investor, somewhere in the $20,000 range. But you can get a much better price than probably what you see elsewhere on the internet. Very close to wholesale. He has to make a premium, but they're less than anybody I know of. But again, there's kind of that restriction. However, he is working on a way to do it at any level. In other words, you're buying a roll or whatever, and still keep that same small premium available. He's working on it now. Once he accomplishes that, I will put it out to obviously my paid subscribers first, but I'll put it out to the free list as well, which is 55,000, and just give you a link to be able to buy. But hasn't happened yet. But stay tuned, get on the free list. It does have its advantages.
Okay. Cool. Physical. All right.
The other part of that, sorry to interrupt. Once that's accomplished, I like cash rich, top tier mining companies or streamers. That's your best bet. I mean, if you get where I started with Pan American at like $250 a share, it's gotten beat up recently. I think it's still a very good company. You might have to have some patience. But my dividend, rather than being like 1%, is 10% because I'm getting a dividend on a 250 stock for me personally. That's now like tenfold. So the dividend's basically tenfold. And this is the way you invest. I mean, investing sounds wonderful, but there's very few companies, especially in this space, that you can hold long term. Again, you can do the streamers and the royalty companies. They're pretty much long term, but a lot of the mid tiers, well, especially the juniors, just disappear, as I said earlier. So you got to be real careful. Again, part of the industry I don't like is that there's a real emphasis on the junior mining sector. And the emphasis is from some very well-renowned, very rich billionaire class people. But what they're really not telling you is the total truth. They're telling you, oh, I don't touch the majors. I only invest in juniors, but they don't invest. They finance juniors. And when you finance juniors, you're at a whole different level than your retail investor that does invest or speculate in the sector. And what most people haven't been taught, and I've given this lecture 2 or 3 times, and people just fall asleep. And it bothers me because it's really important information. And again, I learned it the hard way by buying too many juniors in my youth. But most of them, 1 in 4,000 becomes a mine. So you want to be very careful there. But if you are able to be in the class where you can finance these things, well, that's a different ballgame. Now you're putting in something that's the seed capital comes in at 5 cents. And the first or second round that goes to the retail investor of high net worth that are allowed to do it per the rules might be paying 10, 15, 20 cents for something you start at 5 cents. Well, of course you do that all day long. And this is what really, really happens in the sector. So when you hear, oh, I only invest in juniors, and it's somebody that's well recognized in the industry, you might really rethink it and go, wait a minute. These are people that get in on the ground floor sometimes before an IPO. Yeah. And that's an advantage that they don't really discuss openly. What they do is they say, they're making all this money. Well, yeah, of course they are, because they're financing. And even as a financier, you don't win every time. There are times you get 5 cent or 10 cent stock or 15, whatever it is, on the first initial offering or second, and it still fails. In fact, there's a lot of failures in the junior mining sector. So,
Okay. From Piero, what do you feel is the most undervalued or discounted silver or gold miner right now? That is to say, which one is the biggest bargain right now and just caught in the downdraft? Thank you in advance. Wishing you both good health.
Boy, that's a tough one. Whatever I say, it's probably going to be wrong. But I would say one that I really like, and I own it, so I'm biased. I like Mag Silver. They have got just super high grade. I've known Dr. McGough for a long time. I trust him totally. He's taught me a lot about geology because I'm not a geologist, and he's just an all-around good guy. And you want to look at the people, behind the project. So that would be one that give you, there'll be a junior that outperforms it. Yeah, probably. But with being able to pick that 1 out of 4,000 is a pretty tough task. I'd much rather give you something that I personally own and I think is probably undervalued at this point. You're probably going to be safe and still make a fairly good amount of money, especially when the sector takes off.
Yeah, I got to say, Mag Silver looks pretty good on the charts too. It's coming into one of those.
I do technical work as well as fundamental. I do them both. I mean, there's people that are pure technicians, which I never bought into, but the charts do help. And then, of course, fundamental analysis is pretty all encompassing. And you're taking in, what the interest rates are, what the Fed's doing. I mean, all those factors, and try to come up with a reasonable, logical explanation of why these, prices are too low. But charts help a lot. And thank you for pointing that out. I kind of forgot that part of it, but I did look recently. So thanks, Steve.
Yeah. I'm a pattern guy, so I like that stuff. Okay, from Calif, France. Could we see in the next bull market for precious metals the physical side outperforming the mining sector?
It's possible. I wouldn't rule it out, especially with silver, because it's a requirement for industry. In other words, they'll pay any price to get it. Otherwise, they're out of business. So the possibility exists. However, from history, the mining sector outperforms usually at about a 3-to-1 factor. So if you had $1,000 in your investment and it doubled, it'd be like 6-fold in the miners. Now, just because that's history doesn't guarantee it'll be in the future. I think what could happen is once this manic buying phase takes place, which I think is within the next 3 years at the most, then people that are late to the party, in other words, go, oh my goodness, gold, how did gold get to 3,000, and it's making another new high. A lot of those people will not buy gold. One, to buy, put up $3,000 for a coin is a lot for most people. And secondly, there's always those penny stocks. There's XYZ gold that's only 12 cents. Baby, I'm buying it. And people will buy cheap stocks. They'll buy across the board. The professionals will buy the big ones, the top tier that's in the Morgan report, the ones I own primarily. But it'll be throughout the sector. So it could be where anything and everything with gold or silver in its name gets a bid. And that's what happened in the 1980s. We'll give a real quick example. I know you're giving me a lot of time today, but there was a guy named Phil Letch way back in the day when I was still working in the aircraft industry, but trading silver avidly. And I was telling him the benefits of, precious metals. And he heard the same song and dance over and over because we carpooled. And he finally, near the top, said, you know what? I'm going to take a stab at this. So in those days, the American Stock Exchange probably only had 100 companies. And we were in the LA area, looked at the LA Times business section, went through it name by name, probably took 10 minutes. And he found Golden Knight. He bought Golden Knight at $2 a share, sold it at $4 a share about 2 weeks later because we were in that panic manic. Everybody had to buy gold. And he doubled his money. And then he did his research. It was a women's lingerie company. Had nothing to do with it. But I do that example, which is from my own experience, to prove that when the market gets hot, you can't believe how hot it can get. And I think it will do something similar in the future. I really do.
We saw a little bit of that with the recent run up with GameStop and AMC.
Mm-hmm.
There was another stock that had a very similar ticker, but one of the letters was switched and it had a run up as well, simply because people thought that they were buying GameStop when they were actually buying something else. So I can totally see that. It's a Golden Knight. That's great. Okay. This is my question. What do you see coming up with the BRICS meeting on October 22nd through 24th? Do you think this is going to be a nothing burger? Do you think they're actually going to come up with some type of settlement system outside the dollar between these countries? Do you think that there's a possibility that they could have it backed by gold? What do you see there?
Yeah, I did a whole editorial in the last report for our paid subscribers on that exact question. But to summarize it, I think it's closer to nothing burger at this point in time. I think that's all that's going to happen is what they've said, which means they're going to make an announcement. So talk is cheap. You can say you're going to do something, but it never really manifests, or the outcome is different than you maybe proposed in the beginning. I think it's a good wake-up call to the monetary system at large, the financial system at large, because at the end of all great inflations, people, entities look for a way to mitigate the problem. And so they want to be outside the US dollar because they realize that, it's losing ground, it's losing purchasing power. So what can I do? Well, cryptocurrencies is one huge one that's come to the fore in the last decade or so. And of course, gold and silver have always been there. And then you've got other means of payment like the Ithaca dollar and these communities that actually make their own currency. Barter clubs and that type of thing. So it's a very strong indicator that we're nearing the end of this great inflation and that there will be a reset of some type. Whether or not BRICS really is the leader in that or not remains to be determined. And the thing about BRICS proposal, the way I understand it, what I wrote about, is that I doubt at this time, well, we know at this time it's not going to be convertible. And so that makes it less attractive to people that really understand how money works than just saying you are backed by gold. But I'm open-minded, and we're going to probably keep updating that same question because it will change over time. And we'll just see. But the idea is important. I think that's the main factor is like, look, the US dollar has had such dominance in the world economic system for so long, and you guys just print stuff and get real goods for it. And we're tired of that. And we're going to start trading our own currencies. The main thing that will happen is that gold backed or not, the idea that you don't have to use the US dollar for final settlement is huge. And that's the main thrust of BRICS, the way I see it.
Okay. All right. From Ian Evan. Hi, Stephen David. I'm eternally grateful for your tireless and generous work, David. And his question is on CBDCs. If CBDCs came in, is it possible that they could reprice precious metals at whatever level they choose, leaving the only real option to hold physical metal you could barter with, which is possible with silver, but hard with gold?
Could be. Certainly can't rule it out. I'm pretty open-minded. I mean, if you ask me, are there aliens? I would say, I don't know. So, there is a possibility. But back to the question, possible. I doubt it, but he already answered his own question. If the CBDC was to fix the price of gold and silver on their new system, the real market would be called the black market or the underground market. Now would determine the free price. So just like me with my newsletter, I'll discount the fiat price to, a silver price, which is a 20% discount. And you'll see that you cannot outsmart the general marketplace. In other words, there's always going to be a free market. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a huge market, but even in Russia or other places where the monetary system is under such control, like China, even with that system, there's still a transaction going on right now. Somebody's trading gold for something, or somebody's trading silver for something, and it goes unreported, and that's the way the system. That's the way money works. Good money will always have value to someone.
Yeah, gold always has a bid. Okay, he also asks about the Perth Mint. From what you know of the Perth Mint, is it okay to have precious metals in their unallocated pool accounts, in the sense that they could or would just settle in fiat and not give you the metal at some point?
I don't like it. My friend in Australia, John Adams, he and I did quite a bit about unallocated. Uh, did a series, I forget how many interviews, 2 or 3. And we basically recommended to everybody to read the contract. And if you are in a pool account or an unallocated account, make sure you get to at least an allocated account. If not, better, a segregated account. And just a personal anecdote, one of the people that years ago helped me with the report, a very bright guy. He had a huge position, relatively huge position with the Perth Mint. Physical, wasn't unallocated, it was allocated. And he wanted it shipped from Australia, and he got it, but it took something like 6 months. I'm not exaggerating.
Wow.
So I am a little leery of some of these depositories. In fact, I think my speech at the upcoming Silver Symposium is going to be on that topic. All these depositories that have um, failed, either partially or completely. First State Depository in the United States was a depository for a lot of gold and precious metals IRAs. They have some silver and gold, but not everything that they claim to have had. And it's under litigation now. And that was a well-known, well-established depository that people trusted. In fact, it was so well trusted that many precious metals IRAs used it as a primary depository, and it turned out to be invalid. So some people are getting all of their metals back. Some are partial. Some, it's being sorted out as we speak. But it's very disheartening because the main thrust for my work is honesty. My mission statement is to teach and empower people to understand the benefits of an honest monetary or honest financial system. But there is dishonesty in all markets, and gold and silver are not exempt from that. And that's unfortunate, but that's the way the world is.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned the Silver Symposium. I look forward to meeting you in person out there. Maybe I should have led with this at the start of the interview. What this will be my first one. What's your recommendation for the Silver Symposium?
Well, have some business cards and visit every booth at every table. Just introduce yourself, tell them what you do, and just have a darn good time. I mean, the early days was crazy. We had some really spectacularly fun events back in the early days. Not that they're not fun now, but the early days were just very, very memorable. I don't know how long I can talk. I know you're giving me a free form platform, but I think about the 3rd or 4th year, Ray DeMott was the main promoter of it. In fact, he and I were he invited me to dinner. David Bond and Shauna Hillman were there. David has passed away some time ago. Shauna's still here. In fact, I got her or asked her to be involved in the first Silver Symposium because she had done it for so many years and she's so good at what she does. But anyway, we had the Center of the Universe party. And so it was in Wallace, Idaho, which was like the silver capital of the world going back to the late 1800s and early 1900s. In fact, Wallace was the richest per capita city in the US at one. It was all due to the silver market. So they had a manhole cover and they changed the manhole cover. And I forget all four companies, but they had Hecla, Coeur d'Alene, and two other mining companies on a black manhole cover that had been repainted. And then those companies' logo or symbol were put in silver paint, wasn't silver. And that manhole cover was put in over the hole. And we had a Professor Irwin Corey type, you can look it up. I'm that old, but he was a comedian. And we had somebody like that talking about how the theory of the center of the universe comes about. Since it cannot be disproven, it must be proven that this Wallace, Idaho manhole is the center. I mean, just crazy stuff like that, but just a lot of fun, you know. I'm a big believer in not taking yourself too seriously. I'm just bent to be a very serious person. That's just the way I'm made. But certainly I do have a sense of humor. And that was one memorable night. They had these shot glasses. I told mine as a memento. Very well done. I mean, these were extremely solid and etched in glass. It's pretty much a collector's item. Everybody took a shot as the founding of the center of the universe took place.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to it. And I look forward to being there. If you guys want to join us, there's a link down in the show notes for a 10% discount. Hope to see you there and share a drink with you. Okay. This wrapping up here, this is our crystal ball question. You got your crystal ball ready, David?
It's right behind me.
Okay, perfect. All right. So Hector and Eric are essentially asking the same question here. When gold starts to run and silver follows, what metrics are you going to use to trigger your exit trades? Is it going to be a momentum decline for gold and silver ratio nearing 30? You're calling tops. What are you going to be looking for to find that?
Well, the last time I called the top, which was the near 50, I did it based on a lot of factors. First of all, trading commodities for a living for some time, and I don't do that anymore, but I did. You either, win or lose. You either, fail or you succeed. And I failed many times before I started having success after success. Not every trade, but I learned how to do it. So when I saw a parabolic move, I knew it wouldn't last forever. And you want to sell on the strength. I knew that it was an amateur's game to try to pick the very top. Actually, I did. I was within 3 days of the exact top. And I got a few people that got back to me later and said, thank you. I had one guy from the Netherlands, and he gave me a box of Belgian chocolates as a thank you, because he said, man, I was way over leveraged. I had all this money on paper, and you said it was the top, and I cashed out. Had I not done that and waited a few extra days, I probably would, be destitute because it was so leveraged.
Wow.
So I did it based on subscribers. I was getting like 3 or 4 new subscribers daily to the Morgan Report as we were approaching the top. So that was my final indicator. And when I did it, I got some blowback from many in the industry. I won't name names. They're still friends of mine. So, oh, you're going to ruin your reputation. Silver's going to 100. You're going to look like a fool. I mean, David, rethink this. You might want to take it back. You should make a new video, and all that kind of information is coming my way. Because I do my own work, and right or wrong, I'll stand by it. When I'm wrong, I promptly admit it. But anyway, point is, it was the top. I never got like a follow-up email. Oh man, how'd you do that? Or you're lucky, or whatever. So the main thing, and I'll plug a plug. David Smith. I'll back up. This is a long statement, but when Chris and I wrote the Silver Manifesto, that's kind of an academic read. It's something I think any silver advocate really should own, but Chris and I wrote it. And David Smith was involved, but David has a different approach to the markets. Chris is more of a finance guy like I am. I'm both doing what David does and also what Chris does, but it really didn't fit David's style. And so I basically told him, let's write another book, just you and me. And let's just leave the academic Silver Manifesto as it is. And that kind of upset him. It's a long story, but he agreed, and he very much agreed happily once we accomplished that and made the second chance. And second chance is primarily David's work. I edited it, I added some of the chapters. And that is many methodologies to sell out at a profit. The subtitle is how to make and keep big money during the coming gold and silver tsunami. I think that's the subtitle of Second Chance. It's cheap. I think it's $20, $30. You can get it off the website. You can get it on Amazon and used copies, I believe. And that's something, in fact, I've had people, and this doesn't make it true, it's just their perception, say it's the best book they've ever read on basically investing or stock trading or taking profits or that type of thing. I wouldn't put it in that classification myself personally, but I will say there's a lot of exit strategies there. So again, don't expect to get every penny. And the main thrust of the book is to filter out. So if silver goes to 1,000 an ounce, which I really doubt, but if you set, I'm going to sell 50% once it reaches 100 or 200, whatever it is, you can make the parameters. And then we also have what's called the sacrifice fly, which is if you miss the market and it really accelerates and you've already taken most of your profits, you could go into the options market and do, a wild bet with a little money to make up for what you may have left on the table. So that's in the book as well. Pretty proud of both the books. But that's me, I'm biased. I helped write them. But
you are the silver guru.
Yeah.
Your Silver Manifesto
there's a lot of
book
people
was very
out there
good,
in
I
the
gotta
silver
say.
space now, and that's fine. And a few of them have written books. In fact, I usually buy every book that's out there in the silver. You can see how many are behind. Not all those books are silver, but and there's some good work out there. But I don't think anyone's written as much about it. And I'll stand by the Silver Manifesto as being kind of the Bible if you're academically inclined, as far as, we have a chapter on the silver manipulation that's beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's manipulated. And, I also get into the last chapter. I think it's called Beyond Silver. And it talks about, do we even need money? It asks some very esoteric questions. And I don't have an answer. I say it's still an open question. But just for you and all the viewers, I am not writing another book. I decided I'm going to do a documentary. It's called Silver Sunrise.
Oh.
And it's going to state the problem. But I don't want it to be an echo chamber. I want to spend 10 minutes on the problem. Anyone that's in our genre will know the problem. And I want to talk about solutions. So it'll be kind of like the Four Horsemen film that I'm in. It's not about me being in it. There's some really good thinkers in there. And it's got a narration underneath the whole thread. But during that narration, there's lots of interviews with some very smart people that talk about the end of the age of empire, which is what the thrust of the movie is, and what the degradation is throughout the system, but primarily the monetary system. I want to be a little broader. I want to bring in the spiritual aspect of it. And I also want to bring in, what's the number one thing that you would do to correct the system or make the world better? It's probably a better way to frame it. And some, very well followed people in the agriculture sector might say organic farming. Someone might talk about the educational system. So I'm open to all those ideas because, again, we need integrity in the monetary system and elsewhere in order to put us, the planet, the people, back on track. And we'll never have a perfect world, but we certainly can get back to basics. And I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be forced upon us. I think the next depression, which we're moving into, will revalue our thinking and also our values at the same time. So I think there's a spiritual aspect to this. Really, the war, from my studied state, really revolves around good and evil. And right now, evil seems to be prevailing. But like the white hat, black hat movies, it seems as if the light will remove the darkness. And I think that's the direction that eventually we will attain. but I think there's a lot of pain involved until we get to that point.
Yeah, I kind of piggybacking off of that. By the way, I got a second the Silver Manifesto book that was very well written. I remember you had an chapter in Chris Marcus's book, and at the end of the interview, you said, "Live within your means, stay out of debt, have some medals, and enjoy life." You know, and I think there is a certain peace that kind of comes over you, and when you get a certain portion of your net worth in the physical metals, that you just feel a lot more peace with your financial situation, that if the S hits the fan, you've always got the best and the strongest financial insurance on the planet, you know. And yeah, I love your work, David. Thank you for coming on the show. This has been a real pleasure, sir.
Well, thank you. A great, got high energy and great questions, and hopefully I've been of service to others. That's what it's all about. That's the highest state you can be in, really, is service to others. Doesn't mean slave to others, service to others where you do it on your own volition. So thank you, Steve. I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Yes, sir. I am as well. You can find David Morgan in the link down in the show notes below, themorganreport.com. David, thanks again, and you have a great rest of the day, sir. And thank you for watching. Click the like and subscribe, and we will talk to you next time.